Welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk. I make music as AfroDJMac. I'm a writer, producer, songwriter, Ableton certified trainer, educator, and now I'm a podcaster. And at this point, it makes for an entire year of being a podcaster. So it was 1 year ago today, March 5th, 2017, that I first started this show. And it was something I'd wanted to do for quite some time. I've been listening to podcasts for many years and always kind of wanted a show like this one. And never really got around to do it for a lot of reasons. I think I had all these big ideas about what it would be and that I wanted to do some certain, you know how it gets. Ideas swell in your head and they get bigger and bigger, and the bigger they get, the harder they are to start. But it wasn't until right around the beginning of March of last year that I just decided to just start talking and do the bare minimum to make this happen. And here I am. And today I want to just kind of share some thoughts, some reflective things, hopefully to give you some inspiration, to give myself inspiration really too. I like to do this show a lot to remind myself of the things that I need to do to keep myself being productive, but I think it's also helpful to a lot of people. The first thing I kind of want to say is that you can start something now and look back and have already started it. So what do I mean by that? I mean, you could either look back at yourself on a year and be exactly where you are on whatever project it is, whatever endeavor it is you want to work on. You could be exactly where you are by doing nothing, and that's the easy thing to do. But if you start now, in 1 year, think about where you might be. For myself with the podcast, this is now my 53rd episode that I'm recording. I've gotten to speak to 31 guests. There have been thousands of subscribers. There's been lots of positive feedback, and a lot of little opportunities along the way have come up for me as a result of doing the podcast. And sometimes they're unexpected, and sometimes it's not always a tangible thing. But I've experienced quite a lot of growth myself by just reflecting on the things I'm doing and speaking with people that are doing it as well. Wide range of guests with a lot of different backgrounds, and everybody has something to offer, which is really great. A lot of the similar themes come up often, but each person has their own little take on it. And I find sometimes just hearing things from a different person in a different way makes the message even more digestible and sometimes more profound and more, more motivating. I don't know. But it's pretty cool to see that so many different people have such a similar view about getting to work, doing the things that need to be done in order to be successful in music, but not just music, in life in general. So I challenge you, if there's something there you're into, to think about where you would be in a year if you started now, even just little bits, just tiny little steps. A lot can happen, but the only time it's ever going to happen is now. It's not going to happen in the past, and the future is uncertain, and we don't even know if we're going to get a future, in all honesty, right? So the only time we have any control over is this very moment. So maybe you're listening to this right now. This is a chance for you. Maybe hit stop if that's enough for you to hear and just get to work. You can only change things in the moment we are in. It doesn't happen in the past. It doesn't happen in the future. It has to happen now. And pretty soon, now will be the past. And where will you be as a result of getting started? I bet you could be in some pretty cool places. It's kind of funny. March, turns out, is a month where I tend to start things. I don't know why, really. It wasn't intended this way, but the podcast began in March of last year. 3 years before that, I started the AfroDJMac Music Production Club. And now that has almost 400 members, and I've produced a pack, some kind of download, some kind of thing for everybody every single month. So that's 36 months. And that, too, was something that I had in mind, some sort of subscription service that would give producers useful tools and items that would help them further their production. But it took me quite a while to get started on that too. And a lot of it was this like kind of planning phase where I had an idea, but then it kind of had to keep finessing it, keep working on it. And sometimes I think there's a point in an idea where it's time to act, and your planning phase just sort of becomes procrastination. It becomes a form of resistance, as Stephen Pressfield might say. Stephen Pressfield, the War of Art author, someone I talk about quite a lot because I love his message in the War of Art. But this idea that like you can kind of plan and try to make everything perfect, but it'll never really get there. So with the Music Production Club, I really wanted to make it as good as I can, which, you know, I think was an important part to plan it. But then you sort of plateau on the planning, and then it just becomes procrastination. So I think you're almost better off planning less and acting sooner rather than getting stuck in this planning phase. Another good example of something I put off for a while before I got started with was my webpage, my AfroDJMac.com webpage. I'm an English teacher. I write, so that's a big part of things I do, and I wanted to have a blog for a long time, and it took me years to get started on it for whatever reason. But it wasn't until March, 7 years ago, 2011, that I wrote my first post. And from there, because I had a platform to work with, I started getting creative and trying new ideas, sharing things I was learning, and kind of, you know, hit my mark when I started releasing free Ableton Live packs, because that was kind of one of the first times I really got much attention for any of my work. And again, that's just something that wouldn't have come up had I not just gotten started with the writing and starting the blog. So again, you know, it wasn't a major leap really at the time, you know, just publishing a blog post, but it turned out to be a really huge turning point in my life, my career, my work. And it's a good example of this whole, where would you be if you would have started a year ago? And we all know how fast years fly by. I mean, it's incredible. We've already done 2 months of 2018. We're looking towards the spring here in the Northern Hemisphere. I don't know where the time goes, but it goes fast. So think about what you could do today that will put you forward in a year. I want to talk for a few minutes, just because I'm finding this very inspiring, about a book I'm listening to. It's called The 12 Rules for Life. 12 Rules for Life. It's by Jordan Peterson. And actually, the full title is The 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. I first heard of Jordan Peterson through the Joe Rogan podcast. He's been on there quite a few times. He is a clinical psychologist, a professor. Kind of got himself into some hot water over some kind of controversial things that are going on. And I don't even want to get into it, honestly, but that's not the point. The point is, this book is extremely motivating, The 12 Rules for Life. And I'm about halfway through right now. And I think there's two I'd like to just mention, two of these rules that I'll touch on. And then I, of course, recommend you read the book or listen to it yourself. And I think you'll find some really practical, useful information that'll help you just kind of move forward and do things, and maybe change the way you're thinking a little bit in case you may be in some sort of destructive thinking patterns. One of the rules is compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not who someone else is today. It's compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not who someone else is today. And this chapter deals a lot with that internal critic, that person in your head that is probably more ruthless and violent, with its thoughts about yourself than you would ever be to another human being. It can be so critical and putting yourself down. If you really pay attention to your thoughts, it can get pretty bad if you're not careful. But this chapter encourages you to compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not who someone else is today. It can be very easy to see the successes of other people, their glories, their high points, and think that, they have it all made, they have everything that you may want. but you don't always get the full picture. And there's an old expression where, most people who think they would trade their problems with someone else would happily take their old problems back after they got involved in the new person's problems. And I think there's a lot of truth to that because you don't really know the full picture. And while they may have success in one area in their life, they may be suffering in an area that you've sort of figured out a little bit. But if you compare yourself to who you were yesterday, that gives you something to be actionable on. Can you just be a little bit better than you were yesterday? What is one little tiny thing you can do today that will put you a little bit better off tomorrow than you were today? And it can be a small thing. It might only take a couple minutes. It might not be the most dramatic leap from day to day. But again, add that up over the course of a week, a month, a year, 5 years. If you're doing that and practicing that every single day, you're going to get a lot of progress. And it's something I try to think about with my own work, with my music, with my writing, with my podcast, with my teaching, is try to just be a little bit better. Try to make a little bit of progress every day. And sometimes it's a very small gesture. It might just be going through my emails and finally responding to them. P.S. Thanks to everyone who's always so patient with me with my email response time. But it might be something a little bit bigger. And it doesn't really matter as long as you're doing a little something every single day. So I won't talk too much about it because I think you should really read the book and listen to it because he has a great way of articulating it. And he ties in the concept with a lot of big stories of humanity, especially like religious stories that have kind of formed our cultures and our thinking, and really does a nice job explaining why we are the way we are in a lot of ways. And why we do often compare ourselves to other people. But if you can compare yourself to who you were yesterday and try to be a little bit better, you will see great results over time. I'm a believer of that. And another rule that sort of ties in with that from the book, The 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, is treat yourself as if you were someone that you are responsible for helping. Treat yourself as if you were someone that you were responsible for helping. Imagine if you were given the task to take care of somebody. They needed your help for some reason. Someone you loved, someone important to you. For whatever reason, it might be a child, it might be an older person, it might be a sick person, it could be anything. But imagine you were given that task. And how would you act towards that person? What would you have them do? What would you suggest? What would you work on? What kinds of things would you do for them? Maybe it's even a pet. That might even work too. In fact, there's a really funny anecdote in this part of the book in which Jordan Peterson talks about how a lot of times the problem with medicines is not that the medicine doesn't work, it's that the people don't take them as prescribed. And I can relate to that. If I get a cold, I don't always finish off the antibiotic the doctor gives me. I feel better and I stop, and sometimes that causes the cold to come back even worse. But I've definitely found that I will not do things that I think are good for me, like eat well or exercise. Whereas if there was someone I was taking care of and it was my job, my responsibility for helping them, I'd make sure they do all those things. But the anecdote in the story is how people don't take their medicine. But when the vet prescribes medicine to your pet, well, people are much better at making sure their pet takes the medicine because they are responsible for taking care of the pet. So treat yourself as if you were someone that you were responsible for helping, because you are. You are really the main person responsible for yourself. No one else is really, especially the older you get, the less, people expect that you need to be cared for, I guess. So it's so important to do this stuff, and it's not a selfish thing. In fact, it's probably one of the least selfish things you can do, because if you don't take care of yourself, then you are less valuable to society. You're less able to contribute. You're less able to add. You're less able to help other people that may need help. If you don't take care of yourself, you can't ever be that person. I think it's an interesting thing to think about on a lot of levels: your health, your mental health, your physical health, your career, your relationships, your music, of course, since we're in the music production podcast. No one's going to help you get better. No one's going to just take care of you and make you successful. That's something you have to do. You have to be the number one fighter for your own cause. It's a great lesson. Treat yourself as if you were someone that you're responsible for helping. You would probably also tell them to think differently, not be so negative about themselves and their work, and to see the positive. So try to do some of those things for yourself. I think that it's just a great rule. I'm really enjoying that book. Again, The 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. I will probably talk more about it on the podcast, as I'm pretty excited about it right now. I want to leave you with one more thing just to think about on this kind of year episode on reflecting on being productive and stuff. And I don't even know if I have the quote right, but here's the sentiment. How you do one thing is how you do everything. How you do one thing is how you do everything. This means that if you're lazy all the time, if you procrastinate, if you kind of half-ass something, if you don't put your all in, well, that's kind of how you do everything. It becomes your normal. If you're always late, you're always that way. That's just how you are. It becomes the habitual thing you do because we are always building habits. We're always kind of carving our little record that's going to just play back what we've already carved, and it becomes this just pattern of behavior. If you can have yourself always doing your best at something, just always trying your hardest, that becomes your normal. It just becomes the way you do things. You always put your best into things, and you probably know people that are like that. And you probably know people, probably a lot more people that are the opposite, that always that always complain as they do things, that always see the negative in things. How you do one thing is how you do everything. So I find this a really motivating quote that I would love to be better at following, but it helps me even do things that I really don't want to be doing, because I can see those tasks as opportunities to practice doing my best at something, to practice working hard. I think those are muscles. They're like mental muscles, hard work, just putting your all into something, doing your best. That's something that you have to practice, and the more you practice it, the easier it is for you to do it, the more normal it is of a behavior for you. So how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I think next time you catch yourself kind of absently doing something without much heart or passion, maybe think about that, because what you're really doing is practicing being kind of absent-hearted without drive or motivation. You're exercising that muscle, and I don't think that's the muscle any of us want to exercise. We want to exercise the muscle that's trying its hardest and working and doing its best. That's about it for today. So again, I think it's so important to just get started. Now is the only moment you have any control over. Take advantage of it. You can't do anything about the past, and the future isn't here yet. You can only work now. And that is something, as I look back on the last year, that's gotten me to the point I am here with the podcast. And it's something I can do to get me further ahead in the future and keep improving the work that I do. It's so important. It's a really big motivator for me to think about where I would be a couple months down the road if I started right now. And I hope that inspires you too. Check out The 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. I think it's a great book. It's got some inspirational ideas and common sense, a lot for sure. It's just kind of a straightforward common sense that I think you can apply to so many aspects of life. There's some really good stuff about raising children. There's a lot about how you treat yourself. It's definitely something that I think can have a profound effect on a person and maybe make us all a little bit better at the things we do and the people we are. I thank you so much for listening. It means a lot to me. I'm so happy that we finished a whole year with the podcast. I'm really excited to do another year and another year after that, hopefully. Right now, I've got a few cool interviews lined up with some people that I'm really excited to talk about about their work, because they're doing some cool stuff, and I'm excited to see what I can learn from them and what I can pass on to all of you guys. So thanks again for listening. This is the Music Production Podcast. I'm Brian Funk. Thanks, and have a great day.